Hello and welcome. I'm Sean Johnson Andrews, and I'm your host for this episode of Breaking Culture Live. I'm the immediate past president of the Cultural Studies Association, and I'm joining you here from Chicago today. I appreciate you joining us in this experiment in scholarly communication. Each week, we speak with academics and activists discussing their work and how it helps us understand a contemporary event or emergent trend and intervene in making the world a better place. Today, I'm really pleased to welcome Gary Hall, whose work is all about experiments in scholarly communication. Gary is a professor emeritus of media at Coventry University, UK, where he was founding co-director of its Center for Postdigital Cultures from 2017 to 2025. He's a media philosopher experimenting with new ways of working as a critical theorist within today's techno-environmental-class-war complex. In 1999, he co-founded the journal Culture Machine, one of the first open access journals dedicated to media and cultural theories. In 2006, he co-founded the Open Humanities Press, the first open access publishing house explicitly devoted to critical and cultural theory, which he continues to co-direct. And he also co-edits OHP's influential Liquid Books series and the JISC-funded Living Books About Life series. He's the co-author of a number of books, most recently Defund Culture, a radical proposal, which he is joining us to talk about today. Thanks for joining us, Gary.
You having me? I'm looking forward to it.
You see, you've been doing OHP for 20 years. Then, are you going to have a celebration this year about?
We're really not very good on celebrating and things like that. You'd think we would. When did we start it? We started it. I think we had the idea about 1996, and then we kind of launched in 1998. So yes, it would be 2 years coming up to, oh my God, yeah, 30 years. That's too long.
Oh
That's
wow,
too long to
wow,
celebrate, isn't it? So
yeah,
it's kind of quite sweet because when we started with journals because there was a bunch of us had open access journals, and I had Culture Machine, and they weren't regarded very highly because they were online. And
sure.
at that time, online was all seen as not quite proper and things like that. Um, and then, so we had all that, and we thought, well, if we band together, um, we'll have a bit more credibility and a bit more status. And that did actually work. There were people who, in their nation's kind of review systems, evaluation systems of journals, when journals were on their own, they were being rated quite lowly. But then when they said, "Oh, well, we're part of Open Humanities Press," and we had all these people on the board, we had Spivak and Negri
Sure,
and
sure.
and all these people, because we knew that we needed that kind of status, those kind of markers to single it out. And so and that worked with the journals. And then people started telling us, well, you can't do it for books because the copyright's different on journals. Journals, you can put preprints and things like that, but you'll never be able to do it for books. So it's kind of, if people tell us we can't do things, we tend to get a little bit bolshy, a little bit stroppy. So in some senses, the 30 years is quite something, because it's like, okay, tell us we can't do this. And they always tell you as well, it won't last. People will get tired, they'll get burnt
Sure.
out. You can't do it in the way that the so-called professionals can do it. Whereas, we've proved that wrong, and there are other open access publishers in
Yeah.
in our
Now
area as well.
it's sort of the
Thing.
it's not the gold. It's not all open access gold, but that is the gold standard. I mean, certainly for me, I'm
Yes.
I'm always looking to be able to publish my work open access. So
Sure. I mean, it's much more accepted now, and people just want it. I mean, why would you put it behind? Why would you put it behind a barrier and things? It's interesting. I haven't done any research on it, but I wonder how many earlier career scholars are launching things like journals and book
yeah,
publishers these days. Around our time and immediately following, there was quite a lot that launched. But I don't know. I need to do some research on it, but I don't know that subsequent generations have been doing it, and I'm not really sure why that is. I'm not sure whether it's maybe journals and books are not such a thing. If you've got lots of social media platforms, things maybe you're used to that. Could also be that people these days just don't have the spare capacity. They don't have the time to be able to devote to it. And we had time to do research, and we devoted some of that to publishing work and making it available. But maybe people these days, that's not possible for them.
Well, I think there's also the platforms that you've made possible that make it so that scholars can just kind of plug into those, or at least
No.
those kinds of models.
Yeah.
Um,
We've tried to make, it's not just the content we make freely available, it is the infrastructure and right down to kind of legal licenses and documents and things like that. So yeah.
well, I want to end up talking about that at the end because copyright figures
Okay.
into one of your kind of solutions to, or at least like
Okay.
proposals in defund
Yeah,
culture.
yeah.
But the first part of the book, Defund Culture, a radical proposal,
Hmm.
um, is based on a piece of the same name you wrote, I think, for Radical Philosophy uh,
Yeah.
back in, I think, there's a 2022 or 2023. But some of your argument there is situated in a very British or even European context of cultural funding. And I want to unpack some of that,
Okay.
your proposals for how to address it, and talk about how it compares to the US context, because I kept trying to make these
Okay.
comparisons.
Yes. All right. That'd be
but
interesting. Yeah.
But I thought we could start with this opening chapter that you have, where you
Hmm.
talk about the Conservative Party and its use of the culture wars as a means of attacking the arts. And
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
lay
Yeah.
it all out there, it's really jarring to see how similar the experience is between the U.S. and the U.K.
Okay. Well, obviously, yeah, we've learnt a lot from you.
Some of the worst things, vice versa
Yes.
too.
No, I mean, but lots of them. I mean, particularly someone like Nigel Farage of our Reform Party. I mean, he was a very big Trump disciple almost. He's putting some distance between himself and Trump these days, not surprisingly. But he's also nearer to getting into power, and most people in the UK are not big fans of Trump. So
Mm.
it's just too much, even for some of those on the right. Um, so yes, it's a weird situation, but trying to and they've been much better. I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? It's ironic that the right, which is very individualistic, very self-orientated, they're much better at forming a community and getting themselves elected. And well, it's a common argument. And people on the left, we just fall out over the tiniest little things, and we're just marking all our difference, and we're not so good at actually joining together and getting things done and actually succeeding on the kind of in terms of mainstream politics. And I guess
Well, it helps if you have Robert Mercer funding your platforms
of
in the
course, yes,
background. So
of course, there's lots of money behind it, and yeah, we know all this. And the book is about the first part of it is like analyzing the situation, and the second thing is, look, there are still things we can do in this situation, but it's just the way that they've actually been able to do that. And one of the things I'm feeling, because obviously, like you, I've probably been doing this for quite some time now, and just thinking, well, look, the way that we're working overall, I mean, there are some things we've achieved and things, but overall, we haven't had quite the success that we would have liked. I mean, for example, if you talk about the Cultural Studies project, and you go back to the Birmingham School and you go all that, I mean, the kind of language they're using and what they hopes for, it hasn't really kind of panned out. And I'm kind of I'm wondering why that is.
mm.
And also, do we need to change? I mean, it's what is it? Is it can't be just, oh, we'll carry on doing this and we'll carry on speaking the same language and we'll hope that someone somewhere will eventually recognize us and go, oh, okay, maybe we actually need to change in the same way that I think, lots of the Democratic parties, I mean, they don't seem to have learned from the last election loss in the US, don't they? This seems like, okay, we'll just do the same thing and
Well,
and hope somebody will like us. And maybe the message is maybe the same thing is not what you need to be doing. Maybe you need to change.
and that seems to be part of the overall argument. That
Yeah.
we can't keep doing the same thing. We need to
Mm.
find new ways of doing things. Um, but I do want to say, like, given all the attacks on culture and the arts, because that seems to be a common theme both here
Yes.
and in Britain,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it seems like an inopportune time to recommend defunding them further.
Thank
But
you.
but you
Indeed, it
say
does. Yes, I understand that. Yes.
but you say, quote, "Perhaps it's not just a threat, but an opportunity, one that gives us a chance to argue for real transformative change by asking whose or indeed what culture it is we want
Yeah.
funded."
Yeah.
So maybe I don't know if you want to say a little bit more
Sure.
about this.
Yes, I
This
mean,
is
obviously, the immediate impulse when culture is under attack in so many different ways, both in the university and in culture and in institutions, world nationwide in the UK, the immediate temptation is to go, no, no, we need to stop these attacks and if possible reverse them. And even more so now we have a Labour government in power. To appeal to them, it's like you need to bump this up, you need to bump up the funding and things. Um, and I understand that, and I certainly don't want to be arguing that culture doesn't need to be funded. I don't want to be saying that. But I was just also thinking, and I don't know how typical this of me is, I was thinking, okay, glass half full, can we use this as an opportunity? Is this a kind
mm,
of a moment where we can think, we can do something else if we wanted to? We can use that kind of gap and start to think, yeah, what culture do we want, and whose culture is it going to be? Now, even people on the left in the UK, they will say, well, we need the BBC, refunded. And we don't need all the tax from the Tory government about the license fee and things. But what you're going to get if when you look and spend the first two chapters kind of detailing this is who mainly controls culture, who creates it, who's funding it. And in the UK, it's public school educated and Oxbridge educated people with their values, with their sensibility.
yeah,
And so if you're going to fund that, I mean, this stuff about I was shocked about this. The BBC until really, really recently, I think it was about the 90s, something like that. If they wanted to employ somebody, they had someone in the BBC who had an office from MI5 who would look at the
right,
applicants. And if they had someone that was left wing, or had a family member who was left wing, or knew someone that was left wing, MI5 were ruling them out. So by saying, we want to defend public culture and we want to restore funding to it, I mean, who's the money going to? Who's the support going to? It's going to the same people. And we're going to
yeah,
get the same for, it's different. It's different. Culture's different in Ireland, it's different in Scotland, but in England, culture's kind of bland, middle, upper class, kind of wishy-washy, anti-intellectual. It's really hostile to European thought. Anything that's kind of difficult, abstract, complicated, which goes back to in the book I talk about the nature of public schools and why they don't want to they're teaching people to kind of behave in a correct way and teaching character, but they're not teaching intellect. I mean, they didn't used to do difficult subjects, partly why they used
yeah,
to do Latin and stuff like that. Boris Johnson was always quoting Latin and stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to say, well, I know the immediate temptation is to refund the current cultural institutions, but is that really what we want to do? Maybe we could use this glass half full as not just um, a moment of crisis, but maybe it's also a moment of opportunity. We can rethink who it is that we want to fund, whose culture we want to
yeah.
have, and what kind of culture we want to have.
Yeah, the example about the BBC reminds me of like early on in the sort of second Trump administration when they were cutting the funding to Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. There was this moment where the band REM,
Hmm.
they have a song called Radio Free Europe from the early.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
earlier in their catalog,
yeah.
and they re-released it with this sort of like I don't know, it was a celebration of Radio Free Europe and a
Okay.
demand to kind of
Yeah,
restore the
yeah,
funding, and I kept looking at this and going, "Are you aware of what Radio Free Europe is or
yeah.
does?" Like, this seems like a very strange thing to try to
Yeah, yeah,
defend in
yeah,
this
yeah,
particular moment. It's sort of like, well, this is a sort of new imperial,
yeah,
propagandistic, outfit, and we're saying, "Well,
yeah.
we wanna restore the funding,"
Yeah,
so
and I understand it because you just think, well, we're losing even that, and it
yeah,
makes you, it moves. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is it? The Overton win and everything. It moves the barriers to what is a kind of a victory or a gain, and it moves
yeah,
it so far right that even any any little things that you manage to hang on to, I mean, they're still quite conservative. So
USAID and Radio Free Europe.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What,
So
what, one of the, yeah,
what I
one of
was
the.
trying to think is,
Oh,
well,
go ahead.
what do we actually want? And it isn't, I mean, on the one hand, you kind of think of that's a bit of an extreme or a bit utopian and things, but defunding public schools has been part of the Labour Party manifesto, so it's not that kind of crazy. I mean, there
Yeah,
are these arguments. The Conservatives were talking about redistributing funding away from London into other parts of the north, to the north. Now, I know that that's really just for them to attack liberal institutions, but people are talking about this kind of thing. And if you think about what happened in COVID, I mean, policies that were previously created a scandal about being Marxist or socialist, because what's the government providing all this funding for? Well, you were able to do it in certain situations. So
yeah,
it's not a practical thing, and
yeah,
it's not a utopian thing. It's a political decision. So
yeah. As you were, and I'm not as familiar with the British context that you're writing from, but as you were sort of enumerating all the ways that sort of cultural funding operates in Britain, whether it's in particular, supporting particular kinds of elite private schools, or like you just said, supporting arts in the city. I kept thinking of these tensions between Matthew Arnold and Raymond Williams. I
mm,
don't know if this is a reference that kind of means anything for you. The culture is ordinary argument that William Williams makes, talking about these sort of Oxford dons in the tea shop. Um,
yeah, yeah, of
uh,
course, yeah,
but in your case, you're kind of enumerating some other things about them. They're often very often straight, white male, cisgendered.
yeah,
So one thing you're recommending, or the sort of overall thing you're recommending, is disinvesting from a cultural sphere as it exists now, and what you say, strategically transferring that investment to other areas of society instead. And I
yeah,
don't know how kind of granular you want to get with you give three proposals. I know they're just the preliminary ones, and you're kind of saying let's put these out there, and then maybe there's others that'll come up.
mhm,
But I don't
mhm.
know if you want to discuss those in particular. I don't know if that's in your, but defunding the private education,
Yeah.
defunding
Like I
London,
say, I
defunding.
mean, that was part of the Labour. I wanted to do I mean, I'm a theorist primarily, but I wanted to have all the statistics and the facts and all the data in there because I didn't want people to say, well, look, he's just this kind of crazy lefty who's just, this is his argument, but he's just, he's making this stuff up or he's just extreme. But there's lots and lots of research out there that's saying, this is the system that we're in. And just making it A, so it's harder to dispute, and B, that it's showing that it's not just me saying this. When other people talk about the class ceiling and all these kind of things, often they just want greater social mobility. So they want more working class people or black people to be able to rise up within the system and maybe go to Oxford or Cambridge or
Yeah,
have those kind of opportunities. But the problem with that is, well, the system itself remains intact. You've just got a small number, and there's never going to be enough. They're never going to let enough people for it to actual be a system of equality. Enough people to rise within that system. But that system's already intact, and most of us
yeah.
didn't have a say in building it. We didn't have a say in how it's structured or anything. Um,
And a lot of
so
that's been in place for decades, centuries, even you could say.
if not
Some of that,
centuries, if you're going back
yeah,
to
some of
Matthew
it,
Arnold and things like that. So yes, so it's about saying, well, but what if we wanted a very different a culture? If we wanted different people, where one of the arguments would be for people is where's the money going to come from? And as I say, it's a political decision. We could decide to fund different things. So yes, part of the Labour Party manifesto in the past, it's been to defund public schools. It's part of Conservative policy initiatives at various points to kind of move funding away from privileged institutions in London and move it out to often the north. Um, the copyright is, well, the copyright system. I'm just doing something on copyright, which is also going to be a bit provocative, but because there's lots of people now saying, uh, all these big AI companies are trampling over people's copyright and
yeah,
extracting it and making profits. And this is true. And I'm not for that. But the way that they do it is they're defending it. They're defending the established copyright system. Even Paul McCartney, and I'm very sad at this, but I'm even criticizing Paul McCartney because he's just part of this big system. And
Yeah.
yes, Beatles are great, and wasn't so keen on the Mull of Kiltyre, but some of the other stuff's very good. But you're still defending a system that really doesn't work for the vast majority of people. So if you read some of the copyright literature, and I know you've written on this as well, we were talking about that earlier, is if you got rid of that, or you choose to, instead of all the money that the UK government puts into protecting its copyright and IP, and you used that and distributed it to fund different alternatives, you could have a very different culture, something that's a bit more surprising, a bit more innovative, and you'd give more communities, more sectors of the society, more of a chance to contribute and contribute in their own ways. I mean, it's the same with, we want to take it back to open access publishing. If you see where all the money goes for professional publishers, a lot of it is on IP protection. I mean, that's what they're doing. That's what they're spending on. They say, oh, we need to charge you.
Or the
To do,
paywalls.
yeah,
All
for the
the paywall
paywalls,
systems and
and that's
yeah.
what we need to protect. But if you kind of, well, we can do other things. And what's interesting about the publishing aspect is, it's within our power. I mean, you're doing this. Again, we were talking earlier, and you kind of just casually said, well, this is just basically me. I'm doing this. There's not a big machine behind you, but you can still do it, and you can get it out there. And so, if we want to do things differently, we can. I suppose the one of the main arguments of the book is, well, it falls on us to actually experiment with this, because who's going to do it anymore? Who's left in culture? And you tell me what this is like where you are, but who's left in culture that's going to experiment with this type of thing and explore it? I mean, that's what universities are traditionally for, is to just not go along with the common sense, but to interrogate it. I mean, that's the old kind of Gramscian, Stuart
Sure.
Hall kind of version of cultural studies. Um,
Not so
uh,
much anymore though.
well,
Especially here. I mean,
even cultural studies falls into these kind of habits, or these things that are taken for granted. But maybe we cultural studies need to move
mhm.
on. Maybe as scholars, theorists, academics, maybe we need to think we can do things differently, and maybe we still have an opportunity. I mean, it's harder and harder. More people are being, let go, made redundant, put into precarious positions, fired
Yeah.
and rehired and stuff. It's going to be harder and harder. I mean, this is kind of what they want. They want kind of few people to be there questioning this, challenging this, and we're all there just thinking of how can we start a business, how can we make some money, how can we just go along and I start off by saying about, most people just want to fit into the system. How can I rise within the system rather than thinking, do we need an actual new system? But we as academics talk a good game, but how much do we actually do about thinking, well, what is it that we could do to operate differently, work differently, publish differently?
Yeah. I mean, and I think so you could talk a lot about the funding, about where the money is going, where it kind of comes from. Um, definitely, looking at the, and I guess one of the things that's different in the U.S. is this sort of, for instance, the way that Oxbridge and
Yeah.
Oxford and Cambridge work, that they do get some public money from the
Yes.
government, which is I was trying to think of the way that that works in the U.S. and
Okay.
it's similar. There's a similar way that it happens here in terms of giving kind of research funding. So,
Okay.
Harvard might get Harvard evidently gets a great deal of money, as we've kind of discovered
Oh, wow.
when the Trump administration pulled the funding this year,
Ah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I was looking at their endowment. You say that Oxbridge has an endowment of 21 billion,
Yes.
which
It's
which is
quite
a lot, but
significant. Yes.
Harvard's
And there are
endowment,
good things about that. That makes them quite
sure,
autonomous, because the rest of us, when we're other universities are dependent on what's called the research excellence framework, which every 8 years they come around and assess everyone's research, and depending on how that gets assessed, then they assign you money for your research. Whereas Oxbridge doesn't not so concerned about that because it's like, well, we've already got enough money. I mean,
Yeah.
lots of their money, they're getting it from lots of different ways, but lots of it is from being really old and owning lots of property and lots of land.
Yes.
There's a college in Cambridge that owns a really huge container port in the UK,
Really.
and yeah, so they have enough money to fund the whole university. It's not, it's huge.
The college
Uh,
owns a container port.
well, because they back in whenever it was, I'm going to just give you a little story how accurate it is. I'll have all the colleagues I know at Cambridge will be saying, no, that's not quite true. But back in the day, they owned land and they owned a kind of a port.
Sure.
But this port turned into one of the biggest container ports in Europe eventually over time. And if you own that container port, then it generates quite an income for you, things. So,
Wow.
but they're not the only college to have those kind of investments, those kind of property. So that can make them, and the old liberal version is that makes them kind of independent. They don't have to worry about nasty things like commerce.
Sure.
Whereas for the rest of us, the government can, as you were talking about in the US, the government can threaten to withdraw your funding if you don't act in a certain way, and if you don't get rid of your DEI initiatives, and you don't get rid of anyone that said anything about Palestine. It can control you, and we're seeing, in the past we've trusted what in the UK we've trusted on and people in government to be good chaps. So they could always do what the kind of thing that Trump did or Boris Johnson did, but they're always good chaps, decent people who wouldn't kind of do that. Whereas not such good chaps anymore. I mean, Trump's quite happy to kind of mess in academic freedom, and so are governments here
Sure.
now. So
Well, and
um,
and this is actually you have a very provocative chapter. I think the subtitle is like, "Are we really the bad guys?" Which I think is it kind of speaks to what these institutions produce, not just the knowledge and the
yeah,
frameworks,
yeah,
but also who's coming out of these schools. And I was sort of thinking about that. You argue that the result of these universities and this private school funding is to produce some pretty awful people. And we're certainly seeing that in the U.S. too. Trump went to Columbia and Harvard.
yeah, yeah.
Vance went to Yale, and Pete Hegseth cut his teeth as an aggressive asshole at Princeton. So I don't know if you want to dish a bit
Yeah, I mean, I
about
guess
your bad guys.
that comes from a comedy sketch. It's a comedy sketch where there's um, uh, a couple of Nazi SS guys talking to each other, and they're talking about how much they like the uniform, and it's dead cool because they've got the skulls cap, and then they're talking, but why are people afraid of us, and why is all this? And it's like you kind of slow realization of, are we the bad guys, kind of thing. So and I'm talking about in that chapter is this stuff is not just, like I say, it's not just a structure where people move into a certain place. So if we made it more equal, it would still be in this structure that's created by these people. These people who in the UK they're sent off to sometimes at very young age, 7, 8, things like that. They're sent off to boarding school. They're taken away from their families. They're put in very harsh, competitive, psychologically harsh,
Mm,
sometimes physically, but psychologically harsh environments where they just have to group together to kind of survive. And there's a whole literature, psychological literature on what that turns them into kind of quite, well, not great people really, kind of very quite insecure and quite petty, kind of quite domineering. And if you read the biographies of some of these people or some of the people that have been through these education systems, I mean, they all talk about this. They're saying, well, look, it turned us into these people, and now lots of people in my generation, they're all running the government. And it's like, and I suppose my argument is people have talked about how this plays out in psychological terms, how it messes people up, and you get somebody like Boris Johnson who's quite compared to lie and
mhm.
cheat and just do whatever it is for him to succeed and have a good life. But they don't talk about it. Well, how does that impact culture? And I suppose one of the things I'm saying is, well, all this stuff just doesn't go away when it comes to culture. It
Sure.
must be enacted in the kind of the values of the culture, the forms of the culture, So again, it's quite concerning. So that's one of
Well,
the reasons why it's not just to, have people move up within the same culture. It's
sure.
we need to change this culture. Sorry.
Well, and I think that in that sense, it's not just defunding those institutions, but
Yeah.
delegitimizing them, turning the sort of
Yes.
cultural capital that they have,
Yeah.
and saying that it's that there's all kinds of problems. I think that that's happened with several of the colleges and universities that have um, sort of succumb to the sort of Trump administration demands. Columbia University, for instance, basically giving them carte blanche to rewrite their curriculum, to
Yeah.
trample over academic freedom. But that impulse was already there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
part of that basic impulse of these
Yeah.
Ivy League
And you
institutions. That's
and
been
and
there
you
all
want to
along.
say with someone like Oxbridge, you want to say, well, look, if you're turning out these people, because all these people that are running the government and doing these things that lots of us don't approve of, if they're all coming through your education system, what are you teaching them? What kind of people are you producing?
Sure.
And even the outgoing head of was it Oxford, Chris Patton, he was saying, look, we produce bullshitters. So it's not about having a reasoned argument and being clever or smarter than everyone. It's basically they get taught to behave like they do in Parliament. You've got to stand up, you've got to be confident, you just got to say, what's in your interest, and you say that confidently. And English culture in particular is full of people like this. It's not about learning. It's about not about knowledge. It's about a way of being, and in some senses, it's quite a troubling way of being.
Well, the apple hasn't fallen too far from the tree, I'll say. We're,
Yeah, but
we
I
got
mean, if no one says about Oxbridge, what are you doing here? What
yeah,
is
yeah,
this is a problem? In the same way that you're talking about Yale and Harvard and things, they just seem to be unquestionably the best. And it's like,
sure.
well, are we sure? I mean, in what sense? Who's making this judgment? Generally, the people who've been through that system and kind of want to reproduce, and it's not in their interest to question it. But
Well, see, you take that level of sort of questioning that system, and then you up the ante in your proposal section by actually saying, well, maybe actually it's not just these liberal institutions, but liberalism itself, right?
yeah,
You kind of argue that liberalism is sort of poisoned by these origins in white colonial cis hetero patriarchy.
yeah, yeah,
You have a great section there talking about Mill, John Stuart Mill, who's sort of like on liberty, defending his colonial position
yeah.
as he was some sort of officer in the British East India
Yeah, and
Company. Is that
he was
right?
part of, he worked for colonial institution, and he only wrote on liberty just a couple of years after he'd finished that. So he was part of colonialism. So, but it's people from other countries, they don't count. They're not kind of liberalism is all about freedom of the individual, but some people are more individual and freer than others, aren't they? And so
Some
if you
people are
look
more,
into
or
the
more
background a
people.
lot,
They're more people
well,
than
all people, yes, indeed. They're not fully people, and we know, in the US, slaves count as two-fifths of the person, or is it three-fifths of the person?
3/5. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, three-fifths. So they're not fully human beings. But if you look into a lot of the background of a lot of these kind of founding liberal thinkers, I mean, yeah, again, we were talking earlier about they owned slaves. So this is kind of double think of, well, on the one hand, freedom, autonomy, reason, and on the other hand, they've got all this other stuff that is um, they're almost got a blind spot to it or ignoring it, or partly what I'm saying is, well, look, this is part of the system. If you're thinking about Locke and that attitude towards the environment, or and including non-humans in this, they're either, and we think of it still in terms of our attitude to the environment today, or even spills over into attitudes towards AI. But the nature is either something to be romantically protected, or it's something to be used and exploited in the search of profit. So you've got the lockers. Well, property is if my property is if I come along and use a piece of land and farm it or fish it, then that becomes my property.
If it's improved, that's an improvement, right?
Yes, well, yes. And other peoples were because they were seen as part of a state of nature. So the liberals could own and improve them. So part of if we want to see the world differently, the best way to explain this is in terms of the environment. If we want to have a different approach to the environment, and we don't just want to see it as some sort of other that has to be either romantically saved or exploited for financial reasons and for gain, that we have to kind of see it as it's much more part of us, and so we have to really rethink the our notions of the kind of liberal human individual, that kind of possessive individual. So that's why I'm saying, well, theorists have talked about this and we've written about it, and we're Marxist, post-Marxist, post-structuralist, psychoanalyst, we've done all of this, but we
Sure.
still operate in those terms. We're still kind of identifiable individuals. We publish fixed and finished texts. We put them under copyright. We give them to a for-profit firm generally. They put them out as capitalist products that other people can buy and sell, and we still operate in that system. So partly what I'm arguing and asking with this book and other books, mass media and things, and partly what I've been doing with my work, as you were talking about before, is, well, what if we don't operate like that? What if can we think of a different way of operating that isn't operating in terms of that liberal individual? Can we have more collective ways of working? Can we have more processual ways? Can we have different forms of well, it wouldn't even be a copyright license. I'm talking about the CC4R
Yeah.
commitments, which is more of a commitment to acting in a more collective basis. So what would it be like? And we have the opportunity. We can actually do this. That's one of the things about being an academic and being an opportunity. I mean, we've shown it with different projects.
Yeah, and this is where you kind of land up in the book. You talk in the early part about these questions about funding or shifting the funding strategically, but by the end, you're it's more of an epistemological perspective or an epistemological solution where you're talking about deliberalizing modes of working and living,
Yeah,
and you sort of suggest an epistemology of knowing or studying with,
yeah,
rather than about or even on behalf of. And you mentioned here, this is where open access publishing is one of the values that that assists in this. It's like dynamic, dialogic epistemology.
yeah,
So you have a lot of experience in this publishing area, and you mentioned a commitment. Your commitment has worked to working in this way has led you to several collaborations. So I was wondering if you could just sort of share a couple of examples of this process.
sure.
And how
Uh,
it's worked for you, you know,
yeah.
these collaborations that you've developed over the time?
Yeah, I mean, we got into open access for a number of different reasons, and partly this text is just another way of trying to articulate some of that. So yes, we kind of believe that our academic work should be made openly available. I mean, the university pays us to do research, or higher education or whatever, and then we were in a system where we would give it to a for-profit publisher, and they would process it, but then they'd stick a huge price tag on it. I mean, it's 60, 70, 80 pounds and things. Well, we're not bothered about that because we're not really seeing any of that money, because none of us, very few of us actually have a bestseller or anything that would make you anything like kind of to be bothered about the money. But all we want is people to read the stuff. So why won't we, open access developed as in, well, we can get this stuff out there. I guess what myself and various colleagues and collaborators have been thinking, yeah, but suppose an open access succeeded and we made it all, it shouldn't be universally open, because there are some groups who might not want that. There might be some people who work in particular areas or particular languages, or people usually give the example of indigenous cultures, who don't want just everyone coming along and taking their work, and they never see it again, or they never get any say of how it's used. So some people might want closed licenses, or might not want their work translated into English or Spanish or Italian. I think they might say, I'm just going to talk in our particular language, and I'm fed up with it being translated and everyone
Sure.
else extracting it, using it. But So what would happen if open access achieved all its objectives? Well, yeah, people will be able to access the work, but is that the only thing that needs to be addressed? Is that the only thing that needs to be changing? So for me, as you were saying, there are a whole load of other what you might call datum points, or just points where we take for granted and underpin what we do, but we don't really think about that. So yes, one of those was taken from a work from a lot of Latin American theorists when they're talking about, yes, being with. So one of the reasons why we make all our work openly available is that we're not going to go, and we're not with Open Humanities Press, for example. Our ambition is not to become the biggest publisher in the world, and everyone will want to publish with us and publish the way that we want to do it. What we do is what my colleague Yannicka Adema kind of coined the term of scaling small. So we do what we do, and we're doing it in our particular situation, but we make the content available, we make the infrastructure available. And then if people in different parts of the world, different communities, want to come along and take some of that infrastructure or take some of the content to do something in their own situations, then they can, or they can do it in a different way. They can borrow some of it and reject some of the others, or they can not do it at all and they can do something very different. So it's more about scaling in that way. Of like, look, you've got lots of different. It's what certain Latin American theorists, Bartu or Escobar, most famously, it's more pluriversal kind of approach, where you've got lots of these different things rather than a bunch of people in the West and in our case Australia and places deciding what everyone needs. So it's not about scaling that up. It's about, well, we'll make this available and we'll work. Yeah, we work with people in Mexico. We're thinking about we might need to do something, but they've been running. We handed the editorship of Culture Machine over to a colleague in Mexico and Canada because it's nice to have that kind of duality. Because it didn't want to be just us. Whatever it is, and however open we are, and however we want to kind of decolonize ourselves, it's just not the same as someone else in doing it in a different project. And so, yeah, one of the things we wanted to do is, even though all work in open access generally is published on a Creative Commons license, people don't generally make use of that. So most of funders, lots of funders, will legislate and say, well, if you're going to publish, if we're going to fund you, you're going to have to publish on a CC BY license, which is, you can reuse the work. All you need to do is just have an attribution, so you can.
Sure.
You can do all sorts of, but no one ever does. I mean, most people, and we've been trying. We try to get people to kind of do stuff, but they just want open access
Is like
to it.
remixing academic work,
Yes,
basically
yes.
doing a
But
remix
yes,
of
remix it. No, I mean, everyone's read Foucault, everyone's read Barthes on the author. It's just a tissue of quotations to show
Sure.
that it's, there's no kind of originality, there's no kind of first and second and last and things. You can remix it to show that. So one of the projects we've done is gone back to the OTP back catalogue and kind of remixed one of our books, and we give it to our colleague Gabriela Mendez Cotta and her team in Mexico, and got them to kind of remix this work and kind of build on it. And they produced, a text building on that, but it was also kind of quite different and using it in a different context. But just to show, nothing's original, everything's kind of in process, nothing's finished. This is all kind of available to be open. So it's much less that we're talking about liberalism and that notion of property. It's much less like, this is mine, I owned it, I authored it, I created it, you can't do anything with it. And some people have likened that to a kind of almost like a form of settler colonialism. You kind
Sure.
of say, look, there's all this stuff out there, and you're just grabbing a bit of it and hanging on to it and not sharing it and not making it available for everyone else. And it's like, and that's the debate that we see in AI at the moment. It's all this return to writers against AI and for the human. It's because large language model AI is seen as doing precisely that. It's seen as it's getting this almost like this database of culture and appropriating it and extracting it and using it for its own terms. And yes, that is, we want to criticize that, but the way to do it is not to say, well, we should be allowed to just grab all this stuff and and create it for ourselves and possess it. The way is to think of it differently. And maybe even, some of the groups we're working with, or they've gone quiet at the minute, was to think of different forms of AI. So small language model AI, where you can do this with people who are, and people got in touch with us because they wanted some of Open Humanities Press's books, because people can gather journals quite easily, again, because of the different copyright licenses, but books are harder. But if you have a smaller data set that people have willingly kind of contributed and agreed to, can you do a more ethical version of an AI small language model?
Small language
Maybe,
model.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, and trying to do that. And we did, obviously, we didn't agree to this without checking with all our authors and editors and things. And I was expecting a lot more of a backlash around that, and people just not really being very happy. And I underestimated them. There were very few people who were against it. Most
Interesting.
people, most people were either positively for it or saying, "I don't know, I can't really decide." But somebody has to try and do something. So if these people are going to try and do something interesting in AI that we're more happy with as a community, yeah, let's try it. Let's give them a chance. Let's see what happens. So.
Well, so the two parts together, folding those two parts together. Then, I mean, what if we were going to defund culture as it stands?
Mhm.
What would what would you do with a bunch of that? What would you do with a bunch of money at the Open Humanities Press or in these other projects? Is there? It seems like most of this is funded basically on volunteer basis. Um, what would the benefit be to having some additional funds to
Uh,
you know fund these
uh,
projects?
yes, I mean, we have now and again had funding because we're academics and we're encouraged to apply for funding and things, but that's very, very rare. Most of it, and to be honest, most of the projects we keep out of the university because universities can change, management can change. They might be favourable for you in, a one 10-year period, but someone else comes in, institutional memory, and if they own it, or you might want to move on. Might change jobs and things, and if it's too tied to the university, then you can't take it with you, and you have to start again. So the projects we keep outside. We keep them more or less. Yeah, we don't have funding for them because we want them to be democratic. We want them for anyone to be
Yeah,
able to do it. We don't want to say, well, we got this huge budget, and so we're able to use this infrastructure, and we built this, and whatever. We want anyone to be. So sometimes some of our stuff, things like the Liquid Books project, is just done on a really basic wiki, and it kind of look clunky. I mean, it does look really basic, but that's because we want anyone to be able to do this. We don't want to think, oh, I have to produce this glossy. I mean, Anna Singh and Bruno Latour, they built these massive almost projects, these platforms about the
sure,
environment and things. And they're beautiful, they're lovely, they look fantastic. But the number of people that had working on it, the amount of funding that went into it, it's
sure.
great. It's
It's very
great.
very very
Great.
bespoke and very
Very
expensive.
bespoke and great. You can attract that if you're if you're a rock
Yeah,
star theorist, but most
yeah.
of us aren't or don't want to be. So what it was very important to us to say, well, what can other people do? The other advantage of it actually being quite basic and clunky is we have another series which was living books, and that had we did get a very small amount of money for that, so that looks a little bit more glossy, but people don't want to interact with it when it's glossy.
Mm,
They just think it's too finished, it's too someone else's. Even though you can tell them, you can say, look, please, it's on a wiki, you can do with this. No one wants to do it. Where if something's a little bit more basic, a little bit more rough and ready, a little less finished, yeah, people are going to engage with it. So
well,
you're asking what you do. Yeah, and people always want me to kind
well,
of
I mean,
come up with a
maybe
plan.
the answer is that we should not think about culture as commodities, and that the thing that would help is if everyone had a basic living wage, so that anyone who wanted to produce culture would be able to do it, because that's the thing that is kind of like the hitch with all the copyright
Sure.
stuff, right? That
Yeah,
the
yeah.
reason people care about copyright is that they think that's the way that they're going to be able to make a living so that they
Yes.
can survive under capitalism. But if you
Yeah.
didn't have to do that, if you had a way to live outside of the market, then you wouldn't be
Sure.
as concerned with whether your copyrighted material was being exploited by AI.
Yes. And if you're going to put me in charge, then obviously I would be like saying, well, people are going to experiment with different forms of subjectivity, uh, other than the kind of liberal humanist version that we've been talking about. So I'd kind of, it wouldn't be just kind of everyone's, uh, I would particularly want to kind of highlight and privilege them. But the idea of all this would be, it wouldn't be just, it wouldn't be just me kind of deciding. Again, the scaling small idea would be, well, you'd have different communities and let them decide in their situations what's kind of right for them. It wouldn't be, I don't want to be in mass media. There's a chapter towards the end where it's saying, well, is all this about open access and scholarly publishing and all this, is it confined to academia? Is it confined to publishing? And publishing is really important for academics because that shapes how we work. Even if we're not going to publish a piece of work, we're still thinking of it in terms of, in terms that it could potentially be published. We're still the author. We still have the property. We still write in a linear fashion. All these things shape it. But could we transfer it somewhere else? Could you reorganize parts of the cultural life of a city on this kind of radical open access basis? So it was kind of talking about that, but it was also saying, well, we don't want to be in that kind of modernist situation, Le
Sure.
Corbusier or something, whereas I'll devise a plan and it'll look really nice and everyone will have to conform to it. The idea would be, well, you'd have different communities and different organizations and you'd empower them and let them kind of decide. So it would be much more of that commons notion. And it's kind of the way we sort of work. It's not just a community, it's more communities of communities.
Right.
And that commons idea of like, well, there's not an idea of the commons. What the commons is produced by the people who are building it at the time. It's not a fixed idea. It's something that people work out in the process of being commoners. So it would be more something like that rather than me coming up with some kind of philosophy or
Sure.
distributing it and things. And sometimes
If
sometimes
you
you
were
think it would be nice to have more money, and then sometimes that would be just because I've got to deal with the accountants and everything every year and the tax and things. So more money might be also a hassle. So
well, I think you make a convincing argument for giving less money to the really bad guys either way, and the institutions that produce them, and giving more attention to these kinds of community-minded models, of both scholarly production and distribution. So I appreciate being able to talk to you about the work you've been doing in this area, and I'll put in the show notes links to all of these projects,
that'd be brilliant.
and the upcoming ones that you
Fantastic.
have coming out. So.
Okay.
Uh,
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it a lot.
Well, thanks for joining us, and this episode will be streaming on YouTube, or recorded on YouTube. So please share it with your colleagues and let us know if you have any ideas for future episodes or invitees. You can email us at breakingculturelive@gmail.com. So thanks again for joining us. I'm Sean Johnson Andrews. Please check out my Substack at breakingculture.substack.com. Until next time,